Hey y'all, good morning. So today we're going to be going back into chapter 14 in the book, Women Who Run with the Wolves. I turned it the right way the first time this morning. Maybe that's a great sign, right? And we're going to be talking about the third stage called the wandering. And just go ahead and give you a heads up. What you'll see, obviously, when I actually publish this to YouTube, but this video will probably be just a touch longer. I'm anticipating that anyways because it's so rich, and I was very surprised. And so I just want us to take our time with it. I don't think it's worth splitting it into multiple videos, but who knows? We'll see once we dive in and start processing everything, and new thoughts may pop up. So I just hope that you're excited for it. I really enjoyed reading it, and I hope you're having a good day already, whatever time of day it is for you. So okay, let's go ahead and dive in. So the third stage, the wandering. So here she's reminding us in the story, the handless maiden, about the part where the daughter, you know, she's being offered by her father to stay home and be taken care of, you know, because he's chopped off her hands in the bargain with the devil. And so, you know, he's trying to make it up to her, like something like that could ever be made up to a person, right? And, you know, promising to take care of her with the riches that were given to them by the devil. And she says no. So she rejects this. Now, remember that, you know, from this whole process that they went through as a family, fighting off the devil, essentially, she wound up just, you know, being just muddy and dirty, and her hair's matted and a mess. And so she's basically, she's a wreck. She's a wreck. And so she's rejecting the riches. She wants to set off on her own. So she says she walks away from her life as she has known it. Okay, and an important part of this is that, you know, where her hands were chopped off has been wrapped in clean gauze, in white gauze. So that's part of the symbolism that we'll talk about as well. So it says she becomes disheveled and animal-like again. Yeah. And then she goes into talking about the meaning of this, okay, of her walking away, not really knowing what's going to become of her life. Just like us, when we leave a situation that, you know, may be familiar, maybe a relationship, a marriage, a family entanglement, a business partnership that we've been involved with for a long time, whatever it is that actually was very toxic and damaging for us and bad for us. When you're stepping out and away from that, you are stepping into the unknown, just like that song. And I'm going to be referencing those Frozen movies again a lot in this. I was actually surprised how that is actually aligning very well with this story here and her interpretation of this story. So it just really opens up a lot of possibilities for us to take these concepts and do further research if you have interest. So that's what I love. It's really exciting. It's like you're on a treasure hunt, you know? And so I just go back to what I was saying, if I can go back here. So yeah, we're stepping out into the unknown, like that song, Into the Unknown from one of the Frozen soundtracks. And so that's what's happening here. And she's a mess. She's a hot mess, just like we are a lot of times, you know. Sometimes we barely escape with our life, and it's a very serious matter. So her point here is that we're beginning an initiation. Well, I don't know that it's the very beginning. I think going through what we have is part of that too, but this is like a whole nother level when you go into what she calls the wandering. It's like this whole nother just level of a deep dive into our psyche in the developmental process. Remember, all the characters are symbolic of a single person's psyche, but you can also parallel that with symbolism being ourselves and other people in our lives too. So just take what resonates with you, and I know that a lot of us will come away with different perceptions and thoughts and ideas, and I think sometimes we get just what we need, you know, when we're asking, you know. She says, initiation is the process by which we turn from our natural inclination to remain unconscious. I thought that was interesting, that remaining unconscious, she's calling a natural inclination. I guess that's just that comfort, you know, with the familiar, even if it's bad for us sometimes. So that's why it's important to, you know, make sure those that are around you and with you are motivating you, you know, away from being comfortably numb in a situation or even in bad habits, you know, that are not good for you. So yeah, who you spend your time with is just paramount, in my opinion. And so a lot of times during this stage, we find ourselves alone because we realize that the people that we were, you know, spending time with were actually damaging to us. So just another thought while we're talking about it. So she says, initiation is the process by which we turn from our natural inclination to remain unconscious and decide that whatever it takes, suffering, striving, enduring, we will pursue conscious union with a deeper mind, the wild self. Now, right here, when she says the wild self, she's got that S capitalized, and that's really important in psychology and philosophy too. So you have the little self and the big self, and that right there is just something that you can Google, the little self versus the big self, and read all about that if you want. It's essentially, the little self is like our ego, our limited self, our unconscious self, and then the capitalized self, the big self, is that higher wisdom, our higher self, sometimes it's called, or through a Christian lens, the Holy Spirit, or the part of us that is aligned with the Holy Spirit, the numinous part inside of us. All of that, there's a lot of different lenses you can look at this with, but all of that constitutes what they call the big self. So that's the point in here. And a lot of these concepts are in alignment with religious concepts as well, not just psychology and philosophy too. So yes, you're going to find a lot of parallels. Okay, so we will pursue conscious union with the deeper mind, the wild self, capital S. In the tale, the mother and father attempt to draw the maiden back into an unconscious state. It's like a crossroads that we come to. It says, stay here with us. You're injured, but we can make you forget. Will she, now that she has defeated the devil, rest her laurels, so to speak? Will she retire, handless, injured, to the recesses of the psyche, where she can be taken care of for the rest of her life by just drifting along and doing what she is told? No, she will not withdraw like an acid-scarred beauty into a dim room forever. She will dress psychically, medicate herself as best she can, and ascend another stone staircase to an even deeper realm of the psyche. The old dominant part of the psyche offers to keep her safe and hidden forever, but her instinctual nature says no to that, for it feels it must strive to live fully awake no matter what. The maiden's wounds are wrapped in white gauze. White is the color of the deathland, and also the color of the alchemical albedo, the resurrection of the soul from the underworld. The color is a harbinger of the cycle of descent and return. So white, you know, is just widely, throughout all different religions and cultures, very symbolic, right? Here at the beginning, the maiden becomes a wanderer, and this in and of itself is a resurrection into a new life, and a death in the old. To wander is a very good choice. Women in this stage often begin to feel both desperate and adamant to go on this inward journey no matter what. And so they do, as they leave one life for another, or one stage of life for another, or sometimes even one lover for no other lover than themselves. And then she expands on this concept here. So whatever ways our life is changing during this time, this stage that she's talking about, or whatever things, you know, have need to come to pass, need to pass away, the old must pass away, all that kind of stuff. She says it's essentially called driving deep into the wild lands, because one just must. All these are the fortune of the descent. So then she says, so off we go, down into a different light under a different sky, with unfamiliar ground beneath our boots. And yet we go vulnerably, for we have no grasping, no holding on to, no clinging to, no knowing, for we have no hands. This is in alignment with what we talked about in the very last video, where for a while, our paradigms about humanity, people, the nature of people, reality have been shattered, but it's that in-between stage where they haven't been put back together yet, right? So this is a really critical stage, and necessary that you're not being influenced by the wrong things or people. And so that's why a lot of times we just naturally withdraw into ourselves. She even talks about that, and she calls it going lone wolf. And so it's necessary to really be sure as we're reconstructing unconsciously. It's just like an automatic process. When your paradigms, your perceptions are shattered, it's like they're going to try to go back and heal, and you're going to wind up with new paradigms and perceptions about reality and people and all this, but you want to make sure that the pieces go back properly. And because if they don't, you may wind up being a very unhappy person, somebody who just only sees the bad and is bitter forever, or totally unable to trust another human being ever. And so if we don't take this time, this stage of wondering seriously, then it can have very bad lasting effects in our life. So but it's just important to be patient too with yourself, because you're trying to figure things out still. You're pulling those pieces together during this time. So she says, the mother and the father, the collective and ego aspects of the psyche, no longer have the power they once had. They have been chastened by blood. I should know this word. That has been spilt through their reckless disregard, right? So it's like when we're naive. Even though they make the offer to keep the maiden in comfort, they are helpless now to direct her life, for destiny draws her to live as a wanderer. In this sense, her mother and father die. Her new parents are the wind and the road. The archetype of the wanderer constellates or causes another to emerge, that of the lone wolf or the outsider. She is outside the seeming happy families of the villages, outside the warm room and out in the cold. That is her life now. This becomes the living metaphor for women on the journey, or men, any of us on the journey, on the path. We begin somehow not to feel a part of the life that carnivals about us. Yeah, it does seem like a circus, doesn't it? The Calliope seems far away. The barkers, the hucksters, the whole magnificent circus of outer life wobbles and then falls to dust as we descend farther into the underworld. Here, the old night religion again comes up from the road to meet us. This is really interesting. This seems kind of like just unnecessary expansion. It did to me at first, but as I kept reading, I had to flip back and I understood what she was trying to say ultimately. So the references she makes here are very meaningful. So if you're making notes, I just wanted to give you a little heads up. So she's referencing what she calls the old night religion, okay? She says, while the old tale of Hades grabbing off Persephone to the underworld is a fine drama, okay? So he just like snatches her, kidnaps her, right? Far older stories from the Maitreya-centered religions, such as those about Ishtar and Inanna, point toward a definite yearning to love bond between the maiden and the king in the underworld. So there's different spins on this same baseline story with heavy, rich meaning to and lessons for us. So with Persephone, she was snatched away to the underworld. Remember, literally in the story, to the underworld. But her point is that there's other stories that these may have been based on, or were likely based on, where the maiden goes willingly. So In these old religious versions, the maiden need not be seized and dragged into the underworld by some dark god. The maiden knows she must go, knows it is part of divine right, R-I-T-E, right. Although she may be fearful, she wants to go meet her king, her bridegroom, in the underworld from the beginning. Making her descent in her own way, she is transformed there, learns deep knowing there, and ascends again to the outer world. So this could be, you could look at this through a spiritual lens too. Both the classical Persephone myth and the fairy tale, The Handless Maiden, are fragmentary dramas from the more cohesive ones portrayed in the older religions. What was once a longing to find the underworld beloved became somewhere in time a lust and seizure in later myths. Right. So, now, here's something really interesting. In looking up Persephone online, another term that has been used for her, another name for her, has been Kore, or pronounced Kore, K-O-R-E, and that actually means maiden. So there you go. There's just a really simple way to see that connection between that story of Persephone and Hades and the Handless Maiden story we're talking about. Also, sometimes this other name for Persephone was Kora, K-O-R-A. So you have Kore, K-O-R-E, and Kora, C-O-R-A, which, as we're reading, I was reminded of that really crazy movie Coraline. So you might just want to jot that down if you have interest, because we're going to talk about the symbolism of that coming up soon. So, but yeah, Persephone was also called Kore, meaning maiden. So then she talks about you know, this descent that she's talking about into the underworld is actually considered part of our instruction in life. Like an achievement, she says, of the highest order for her to gain this knowledge through first-hand experience. So it's almost like, can we even really get what we need to get on that deep level to develop ourself in that transformative way without it being first-hand experience? Can we really? I feel like if you acknowledge that you can't just read and listen to other people, even though I think that helps so much, I still think that first-hand experience is going to be the most transformative for us. And so when you can look at it that way, I think you can come to a place ultimately in the latter stages of healing, of gratitude, because you see how it all fits together, and you see how some things, you know, maybe had to happen. I'm never going to justify abuse, let me just say that, or condone it. But I'm just saying, it reminds me of that Bible verse where it says, you know, God uses all things for the good of those who love him. So ultimately it's for our development, right? Because we never stop growing. I think it's good to keep a growth mindset anyway. So she says, this is the proper mode of descent. The I don't care so much for things of the world mode. Yeah. And as we see, her beauty shines regardless. The idea of being unwashed also is from ritual olden times, the culmination of which is the bathing and putting on of new clothes to represent having crossed into new or renewed relationship with the self, the higher self, the S, capital S. We see that the Handless Maiden has gone through one entire descent and transformation, the one of awakening. So then she goes into talking about alchemy and the stages of alchemy, which are really interesting. And they all have Latin terms associated as well, but she talks about 3 stages, okay? So she says, there's the dark dissolving stage, the sacrificial stage, and the resurgent stage. So she says the bargain with the devil was the darkening, the first stage. The chopping off of her hands was the sacrifice. And the leaving of home wrapped in white is the new life. And now, as the wanderer, she is plunged back into the negredo again, which is Latin for the the dark stage, right? But now the old self is gone, and the deep self, the naked self, is the powerful wanderer. So I like how she says the naked self, because it reminded me of the fig leaves in the Garden of Eden, right? And so I feel like from a spiritual lens, removing those fig leaves is what gives us freedom. It's like saying, look, I'm not perfect, which how can you even accept and desire a union with a heavenly Father without admitting that you need his guidance, right? So removal of the fig leaves is paramount. Okay, I'm trying to had a little coughing fit, trying to up my water intake here, balance out my coffee. I can't give that up. Well, I can. I occasionally do give up coffee every now and then, but for a time period. But anyway, y'all excuse me, I'm trying to figure out if I'm getting sick again, or if it's just the pollen or what. But anyway, yeah, so the fig leaves. So yes, and it's like repentance. It's turning from our old ways, admitting that we're not perfect, and that in that we are admitting we're not perfect, it makes us perfectly imperfect, because now we can accept that union with a guiding, loving, holy, heavenly Father. You see what I'm saying? Through that spiritual lens, if that's part of your beliefs. But hopefully you're still getting the gist, right? Regardless. Because otherwise, if we don't, this is where the ego has a stronghold on us, if we don't remove the fig leaves. And if we refuse to admit that we made a big mistake, and we stay in a toxic environment or relationship, then you can literally like die a martyr just from not being willing to remove the fig leaves. So it's crucial. It's multi-layered in the realm of importance. So I thought that was, she just triggers so many thoughts in me, the way she writes about stuff. So yeah, she calls it the naked self, right? The old self is gone. And now we are a powerful wanderer. So then she goes into a paragraph here which reminded me of depression. And I know I'm not a psychologist or therapist, but you know, I think sometimes depression can, you may use a lens, you may have interest in using the lens of cycles, different stages in life and life cycles, to view the symptoms that are commonly associated with depression. So she talks about this here. She doesn't use that word depression, but it triggered that thought in me. So I'm going to share it with you. She says, now the maiden is not only haggard but hungry. She kneels before an orchard as though it is an altar, and it is the altar of the wild underground gods. As we descend to the primary nature, the old automatic ways of nourishing ourselves are eliminated. That's why nothing is satisfying during this stage, during the wandering stage. Things of the world that used to be food for us lose their taste. Our goals no longer excite us. Our achievements no longer hold interest. Everywhere we look in the topside world, there is no food for us. So it is one of the purest miracles of the psyche that when we are so defenseless, help comes and right on time. So yes, you know, I found myself losing interest in things I've loved forever, like art. And that's a lot of this stuff where there's no nourishment out there anymore for you. You lose interest in everything. You kind of go into a depression-like state, or not kind of, deeply, or an ego death. And you do just become frozen. And it's part of that transformative process. But see, we don't talk about this kind of stuff in Western modern society. But what if we did? What if we did talk about the stages of transformation in one's deeper spiritual life, psychological self, our psyche? What if we talked about stages and cycles? I wonder if that would change the perception of what we experience in these cycles and give people hope. And that's another thought. Dr. Wayne Dyer has some really interesting books if you've never looked into it. And I believe he's passed away now. But I've read several of his books, and what he noticed in his therapy practice was he got better results with his clients when they focused on the positive. And I'd love to expand on that in another video. But my point is, sometimes we have to change our lens about things like depression or the symptoms of depression so that we can walk forward in hope and not be stuck. Does that make sense? So I just hope that gives you some more things to think about. All right. So she talks about the vulnerable maiden is visited by an emissary from the soul, the spirit in white. This is in the story. The spirit in white removes the barriers to her being nourished. It empties the moat by adjusting the sluice, S-L-U-I-C-E, gate. The moat has hidden meaning. According to the ancient Greeks in the underworld, the river called Styx, S-T-Y-X, separates the land of the living from the land of the dead. Its waters are filled with the memories of all past deeds of the dead since the beginning of time. The dead can decipher these memories and keep them in order, for they have heightened vision that comes from being without material body. And so I'm already thinking about that river in the movie Frozen. I think it's Frozen 2 that we've talked about in a previous video, right? And then she goes into saying, but for the living, the river is considered poison. Unless the living are accompanied across by a spirit guide. Remember that voice that's calling Elsa in Frozen 2? Calling her. So unless the living are accompanied across by a spirit guide, they will drown and sink to another level of the underworld, one that is like a mist, and there they will wander forever. Remember Elsa and Anna's mother in Frozen 2 was singing about the river when they were little girls? I'm telling them the story of this river and how important and profound it is, but you have to be careful not to drown. So here we have another spin-off of these same ancient stories, myths, folklore. They're all spin-offs from, like, what if it's all one story? What if all of it's one story? You know, one great story and just little bits and pieces and spin-offs and different lenses. If you enjoy being on the path and learning and seeking, it's just how can life ever be boring? You know what I mean? When you have all these treasures to hunt, you know, and find. So yeah, she says, so you see, first a woman escapes from the not awake mother and the greedy bumbling father, and then gives herself over to be guided by the wild soul. Okay, so then she talks about you know, Greek mythos, you know, with young women being guided by wolf women or lion women, and symbolism in the Navajo stories and things like that. And then she says, this is where I'm going to pull back on that reference I made earlier of Persephone and the other terms for her being Kore, K-O-R-E, and Cora, C-O-R-A. And I was reminded of Coraline, that movie. She says, the psychic idea embodied here is that the underworld, like the unconscious of humans, swirls with many unusual and compelling features, images, archetypes, seductions, threats, treasures, tortures, and tests. Sounds like a really exciting action fantasy movie, right? It is important for a woman's individuation journey that she have good spiritual good sense. I read that as like staying grounded, or be assisted by a guide who does, so that she does not fall into the phantasmagoria of the unconscious, so that she does not lose herself in this tantalizing material. Right. As we see in the tale, it is more important to stay with one's hunger and go forward from there. So keeping on moving, not getting stuck, not drowning in the river. So I'm wondering if that movie Coraline because all this sounds like it's so intriguing. It's like it's intoxicating for us sometimes. You know what I mean? So I was reminded of that movie Coraline, how, you know, she's there's images where there's just swirls going on and people are like in this trance, and, you know, the button eyes, and how all the different, it's like just a circus of the mind, this whole movie, if you've never seen it. And I wonder if that movie was representative of what happens in our psyche when we do get stuck in this tantalizing material on our journey, when we are just so entranced by the excitement of finding all this material that we just wind up kind of just getting disillusioned, like Coraline in that movie. So just a thought. So it's important to keep moving and yet stay grounded at the same time. You know what I mean? She says have spiritual good sense. So she says, like Persephone before her, and the life, death, life goddesses before her, the maiden finds her way into a land where there are magical orchards, and a king awaits her. The old religion, she keeps calling the old religion, now begins to glow in this tale with more and more intensity. In Greek myths, there were two trees twined over the door to the underworld. In Elysium, Elysium, the place where the dead who had been found virtuous were sent, was composed of what? Yes, orchards. So I've heard other myths where there's a lot of, like a set of two doors or two columns or posts, things like that. Elysium is described as a place of perpetual day, so where the sun never sets, right? Where souls may elect to be reborn on earth whenever they please. It is a doppelganger, the double of the topside world. I can't remember the philosopher who made a reference to this concept where his explanation of reality was like shadows on the wall in a cave to the actual real reality, which we would perceive as like heaven, as being the real reality. And so reality is like a dream. This is just philosophy, which is really intriguing too. But you can Google that, you know, shadows on the cave wall philosophy, and because I feel like that's what she's making reference to here. So, because she says it is a doppelganger, the double of the topside world. Like we only get, you know, glimpses of what it's really like through the shadows. We don't really see the glory, all that it really is, until we're there. You see what I'm saying? It says difficult things may occur here, but their meaning, talking about like in this Elysium place, right? Difficult things may occur here, but their meaning and the learning they provide are different from those in the topside world. I think she's calling where we are now in the topside world. In the topside world, all is interpreted in the light of simple gains and losses. In the underworld or other world, all is interpreted in light of the mysteries of true sight, having eyes to see, right? Right action and the development of becoming a person of intense inner strength and knowing. So it again reminded me of that river in Frozen, because you know, that river is like when she's, you know, in a cave, when she's drawn by the voice, the guide, to the origin of the voice, she finds the river. And I believe she's in a cave and she's looking at, like, I think it's ice on the walls inside the cave, like a glacier. And she's seeing the stories of her ancestors, and it's teaching her deeper self and her connection to everything and her ancestors and everyone. So it's like this enlightenment that happens, and so it's like ancestral knowledge. And so I view this as a form of self-reflection, but with the capital S. The big self. So just something to take note of if you have interest. It says, in the tale, the action now centers on the fruit tree, which in ancient times was called the tree of life, tree of knowing, tree of life and death, or tree of knowledge. Unlike trees with needles or leaves, the fruit tree is a tree of bountiful food. And so she starts talking about how fruit stores water in it, and how water is very symbolic. It's a primal fluid of growth and continuance and all this stuff. So she says, women who are fed by the fruit and water and seed of the work in the underground forests are plumped out psychologically accordingly. Their psyches become gravid and carry on a continual ripening. Like a mother offering its babe a breast, the pear tree in the orchard bends down to give the maiden its fruit. This mother's juice is that of regeneration. Eating the pear nourishes the maiden, but a more poignant action is this. The unconscious, the fruit of it, bends to feed her. In this sense, the unconscious bestows a kiss of itself upon her lips. It gives her a taste of the self, capital S, the breath and the substance of her own wild God, a wild communion. If you have the book in front of you, you'll notice the capital S here. So remember, she's crippled, and so the tree is bending itself down to her, and it talks about her just reaching up with her mouth. So then she makes reference to, the Bible, where it said, blessed be the fruit of thy womb, and, different religions and all this. She says, the remarkable idiom of this story is that during the darkest times, the feminine unconscious, the uterine unconscious, nature feeds a woman's soul. Women describe that in the midst of their descent, they are in the darkest dark and are touched by the brush of a wingtip and feel lightened. This paragraph resonated with me at one stage that I went through. They feel an inner nourishing taking place, a spring of blessed water bursting forth over parched ground, from where they do not know. This spring does not solve suffering, but rather nourishes when nothing else is forthcoming. It is manna in the desert. It is water from stones. It is food out of thin air. It quells the hunger so we can go on. And that is the whole point, to go on. To go on toward our knowing destiny. Yes. The tale resurrects a knowing about a very old promise. The promise that the descent will nourish even though it is dark. Even though one feels one has lost one's way, even in the midst of not knowing, not seeing, wandering blind, there is a something, an inordinately present someone who keeps pace. Like the footsteps, the set of 2 footsteps on the sand. I'm thinking of that. We go left, it goes left. We go right, it follows close behind, bearing us up and making a way for us. Yes, he is the way maker, right? So we transition from carrying our burdens alone, because we're so deeply entrenched in our ego and wearing those fig leaves, to saying, you know what, I need some help from the higher realms. And so at this point we realize we were never alone, and we will never be alone. So it's just a beautiful realization. It says, now we are in another negredo, which is Latin, meaning the alchemical state of decay or darkness, of wandering and not knowing what will become of us. And yet in this very raggedy condition, we are brought to sup on the tree of life. To eat of the tree of life in the land of the dead is an ancient impregnation metaphor. In the land of the dead, it was believed a soul could invest itself in a fruit or any edible thing, that its future mother would eat it, and the soul hidden within the fruit would begin its regeneration in her flesh. So I think it's that powerful spiritual symbolism of water and what's stored in water. And then you think about the percentage of the human body that's water, and you think about the river in the movie Frozen. It's just kind of neat. It's really interesting to me. So where was I? That its future mother would eat it, and the soul hidden within the fruit would begin its regeneration in her flesh. So here, at the almost midway point through the pear, we are being given the body of the wild mother. We are eating that which we will ourselves become. So that's the end of the third stage. And if you have interest in studying the different parallels and commonalities between the different stories and myths, you can always look into like old philosophical texts and religious texts like the I Ching, or the Vedas and Sutras and the Quran, and so you're going to find a lot of similar themes. And that's why I just have this concept of one big story, you know, just different paths to the same truth, or however you want to say it. And I understand that there are critical differences too. Just want to say that. So anyway, I hope that this has given you a lot to think about. The fourth stage coming up next is called Finding Love in the Underworld. And so that should be really good. I've got my highlights from last time I read, and we'll just go forward there. So thank you again. I hope you enjoyed going along with me today, and I just really enjoyed bringing this content to you. I hope that you have a beautiful day, and I will see you again very soon.